Hello patrons, welcome to this month's paint along tutorial. Today we're focusing on painting herons, and I'm going to be using footage from my new camera and some of the photographs that are available in this month's photo pack. I've also attached the specific photographs that I'm using as attachments to this post, so you can also find them there as well. I'm going to be doing a few different views of the bird, some close up and some a bit further away, some focusing on getting the shape and some focusing on getting some of the details and the points of interest on the animal. For today's tutorial you're going to need the photographs, a pencil and rubber, liners. I'm using a 0.3 and a 0.1, two different brands here. You're going to need a paintbrush and paints. Now for painting the heron, I'm going to be focusing on just 4 specific colours: ultramarine, Payne's grey, a yellow ochre, a burnt umber, and I'll also be using a few touches of white. First, let's just have a look at the photographs that I've got of the heron. I've got this little bit of footage, which is a bit wobbly because I'm still getting used to my new camera and I haven't got a tripod for it yet. I've got this image of the heron standing on one leg, which I really like. You can really see the shape of the neck very well on this one and the strength in that beak. I've also got one of the heron with the head stretched out, which is rather nice to see the shape. And on this one, the detail on the feathers is particularly clear, and I want to really spend a bit of time perhaps just at the bottom here, really focusing on the way that the feathers fall on the heron's back. And then I've also got one where the face is very clear, and in this one I want to put at the top of the page and just really focus on the details of the heron's face. So sometimes it's quite nice to do this, to focus on different areas of one specific subject, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to start by working out where I want everything to be positioned. So starting out with the one of the heron's head, which I want to put at the top of the page. And just quickly sketching it out. It's interesting that they've got this fringe under the beak and under the head. I really want to make sure I get that in. Just mapping out some of where these main details are, particularly the position of the eye and the shape of that beak. And that's where I'm going to put the head. Now I'm going to go to the one of the heron standing still. And this time I've got a much bigger shape to deal with. I've got to make sure that I can fit the whole bird, or as much of the bird as I want, onto the page here. Okay, yeah, I think that works about that far. That's fine. If you find that if you did want to fit the whole bird in and you've made maybe part of it too big, you can always rub it out and start again. But I'm going to go with this because I'm going to have another version of the bird over here, which will show the whole shape of the whole bird, including its legs. Here I want to have a little bit of space to write down a description of what I'm looking at here. So it's always good to make sure that you've still got a bit of space for the text in your picture. Now over on this side, this is where I want to put the one that's standing with his leg half up. So this time I've got to make the overall shape a lot smaller to make sure that I can fit the whole bird in. I'm starting at the top of the head, but you might prefer to start with the shape of the body as well. In one of my earlier paint along tutorials I showed you a little bit about that. Just making sure that you can always fit the entirety of your subject, everything that you want to fit in, onto the area of the page that you want to fit it. Sometimes it takes a few tries to do that, that's all. And that's why we start out in pencil, of course. Detail here, I just want to show what the feathers look like on the bird's back. And you can do this, I did this in some of my other journals, where you zoom in, so you pick an area, say around here, and connect it to this. So you might have two circles to indicate that one is a zoomed in area of the smaller drawing. But I'm not going to do that today. And to make sure that it's clear that these two are not connected, I'm not going to put the neck in on this side. I think otherwise it can look like it's the same image. And that's not quite right, so I'm not going to do that. Now I'm happy with how I've laid out the pencil sketch now, so I'm just going to start now on the actual picture itself. So going back to this top corner, I'm going with my 0.1 first. I'm putting the details of the eyes, so that's including the black ring and then the pupil of the eye as well. I actually draw in, when I'm using a lighter marker like this, I'll draw in all of the darker areas, because when the paint goes on it's going to hide the line. So it just gives you a bit more security about where to put the paint down. But it's not going to affect the painting too much. Whereas underneath here, we see we've got this darker area underneath the eye that you can see. Underneath here we've got another area where the yellow part of the beak meets the white feathers of the bird's face. And I'm not going to put a line there, because what's going to happen is you're going to be able to see that line later when the paint's on. So I exclude that. And just outline any of those darker areas. So the line underneath the beak, and the line underneath the face, and then the outside of the fringe. Now I want to put in the crest of the heron up here. A little bit for this part on the top of the beak where the dark area is. I guess that's the nostrils. And there we are, that's the one of the head. Now the one of the heron just standing next. When you're using high resolution photographs like the ones that you've been provided here, don't be tempted to zoom in too far when you're copying them. If you've got a small drawing like this, if you zoom in too far, you're going to be tempted to put in far too many details. So try to keep it about the same size roughly as the drawing itself on your phone or whatever it is that you're copying the photograph from. That way you're more likely not to fall into this trap, so then you'll only see what you can see on the device. So just be careful about that. I've found that in this version I can not really see the details of the beak very well. I can't see where the divide of the mouth is exactly. I can't see those nostril holes anymore. And so I just don't put those in. When you see feathers sticking out a little bit, in these areas you can differentiate in terms of the line. So on this underside of the heron's neck, I'm using a thicker, smoother line, and that indicates that the feathers are smooth and not sticking out. Whereas up here, I'm using more broken lines and a little bit more wobble, and I'm deliberately allowing more wobble in, and then that suggests that there's some sticking out feathers. Again, back of the back here, very smooth. Whereas here, lots of feathers sticking out, so you can have swifter marks and a little bit more wobbly, more free, and that will give that idea that you've got feathers sticking out like this. So you can, as you go along, you can start using your lines to give information other than the divide between different areas of tone or colour. Again here I'm just putting some marks in to indicate those lovely long feathers on the heron's back. That's it. Now I'm going to write in a little description here while I've got my pens out. Just going to put watching the herons. At Seaton Hyde, which I say Seaton Wetlands, that's the nature reserve opposite my house. Tower Hyde. Tower Hyde is one of the hides that's on the reserve, and I'm going to show that in the video on YouTube that accompanies this shorter version of this, so you'll see it there. And let's just find out when this picture was taken. It's 28th of July. So I'll put that in as well. And then that finishes off that page there quite nicely. Now back to the picture of the heron standing on one leg. And on my phone I just adjust the zoom level so that it's roughly the size of the picture that I want to draw. I find that so helpful to do that. It makes it easier because then it's like you're copying sort of like for like. If you're used to drawing things from life quite a lot, it can really help. I find that I can't really see the detail of the pupil anymore at this size. And that's the difference. So you'll find that as you're decreasing in size, the things that you notice are completely different from different sizes. And don't let the observations of the greater amount of detail get in the way of what you're really seeing. I always work from left to right, from this top corner down to this bottom corner, and that's because I'm used to working in coloured pencil, so I work that way so that I don't ever smudge my work. But you might prefer to work from the smallest drawing to the biggest to avoid the trap of putting in too much detail or trying to put in too much detail on your smaller drawings. It's really kind of personal how you decide to work, and it will also depend on the sort of paper you're using and the medium and so on. I'm finding I can see the edges of some of the feathers, so I'm putting those in, these larger feathers down at the back and the bottom of the bird, so sort of the tail feathers and the folded wing. They're large enough for me to be able to see them even in this, at this size. The bit that you're going to want to get right is this shape of this neck. Now look at it really, really carefully. When the heron's got its neck extended all the way, so it's straight like this, you can't see where these bones are, where these bends in the neck are. But when it's tucking his head right in like this, the bulges that you can see here and then the rise of the back, that's going to be the most distinctive thing. It's going to make it clear that this is a heron that you're working on, or any of these birds with the long necks. Actually, they all have very similar sort of shapes to them. So I've put the foot slightly in the wrong place relative to this, so now's the time to change it. If you're not confident, you can go back to the pencil and change it. But any time you notice something that you've done wrong, change it before it's too late here. Just going to put a little indication of the water here. And where the reflection of that foot is. And a couple of the ripples as well. Now finally, I just want to do a little something to celebrate this rather interesting part of the bird's back. Really smooth along the top. Just putting in all the feathers that I can see, all of those little details that I can actually see when I zoom my image in to about this size. And now you can see how these feathers overlap onto the bigger feathers underneath. So these kind of little beautiful wispy feathers give the heron this kind of it's almost like decoration. It's like a flare, a sort of, it's like those tassels that you get at the edge of throws and rugs and things like that, but it's kind of going over the back of the bird. It's these longer feathers. I'm sure they have some sort of evolutionary use that I guess I could look up, but they're interesting to look at, so that's why I'm putting them on here. Just writing a little note about that. Okay, so that's some real quick sketches, and that's filled out those couple of pages quite nicely, isn't it? So I'm just going to use my rubber. I'm going to take out all the pencil lines that are underneath, because we don't want to see those once the paint goes on. Okay, and all of the rubbings now. That's it. So now, as I like to do, I've got, because it's the same bird in every case, there's no reason that I need to do this picture first, then this picture, then this picture. I'm mixing the colours that apply to each of these areas of the same bird at the same time, and then I will add them to this at the same time. So I'm going to start out with a bit of Payne's grey. This is such a useful colour. In my last paint along tutorial of the little landscape, I showed you how mixing Payne's grey with burnt umber so this is Inktense sets. They call things slightly different colours sometimes. So this is sort of natural brown. It's similar to an umber, maybe a little bit more red, but that's quite useful. So I've got them together on the palette. I've got this blue here, and I can start to mix them together a little bit in the middle. And this is the colour I'm going to use to start. And I want to put this in the areas where I've got a bit of shadow. So that's underneath the neck here. And if I want to let it get a little bit more blue, I can do that. I can pick up a little bit more of the blue from this side of the palette and drag it on. Likewise, I can do the same if I want it to go a little bit more brown. I also use quite a bit of water to wash it out when I need to. And to go around the edges as well and sort of soften them a little bit before this, before it really dries out. And I might go again, darken a couple of areas I want to darken here. I want to darken under there. I want want to add a little bit more of the brown on this under the crest here. It just looks a little bit more brown to me. You can look at the reference pictures and look to see where you can see a bit more red, a bit more blue and a bit more yellow. And then that will help you with your colour choices. Now I'm going to do the same with this one and use these same mixture. Shadows in pretty much the same places actually. And again, I've zoomed this right out, so I've got a small reference picture, because like with when you're doing the lines, if you zoom in too much on the colour it can get very confused here as well. So I notice on this one that there's a lot of red in that neck, and I'm using this brown as my source of red in this picture. I'm letting these areas stay white, and if you're on white paper then it will be white here, and they're the lightest areas. I kind of know that I'm taking a bit of a hit with the using this stained background, but it's giving these pages a lot of character, so I don't really mind. I noticed that the tail feathers are a lot more on the brown side, a little bit more red in those. Whereas as you go across this way, you're seeing a lot more blue. And I want to emphasise those long feathers, so let's use a bit more. And I'm going to add just a touch of the ultramarine as well, really make it very blue here. And then I'm going to go in between them. It might look a bit dramatic, but it's making a point of those long feathers for me. So, now going to the one with the long neck. This one doesn't have such a strong shadow underneath in this junction here. It's further back. So I'm going to just move where I'm putting that shadow. And a little bit more of the red in this. You can really see a big difference in the shading between the white feathers here at the bottom of the neck and the bluish grey at the back. So I'm adding a bit of extra ultramarine. Topping up my palette from time to time to make sure I've still got the same colours that I was talking about. A little bit extra blue. Looks quite dramatic, but that's what I want. Now I'm taking some of that colour that I've just put down and just sort of stretching it a little bit. So I like to add water and pull the colour around with a wet brush. When it's very hot, you only have a little bit of time to do this because it dries really, really fast. But I find that in the winter I can keep doing this for quite a lot longer, which is really good. One of the benefits of winter. I'm leaving areas of this white for those long feathers that are on the back. By putting more colour onto this area of the back, I'm making it clear that the neck of the bird is the lighter, whiter area. When you're only using a few colours, you have to kind of use those colours to tell the viewer's eye where that light area is. And that means you might have to use perhaps a little bit more blue or a deeper tone than is actually present. So I'm going to just put a bit of extra of the reddish brown. I've got to be really careful not to overpaint around where the long feathers are. Okay, before I go on to this bit, I'm just going to do the dark crest. So I'm going to add a little bit of black, not too much, I don't want to overdo black. Black is not great. And then I'm going to add a little bit of the brown and quite a lot of the Payne's grey. There we go. We end up with a colour that's very dark but is not black. On this zoomed in one, this is where we've got to be more careful because it is zoomed in, there's more variation that we can see in this. So there's darker areas within this very dark area and lighter areas as well. So I want to add in a bit of that blue back and then use the water wet brush to pull some of that colour out, because at the front here it's actually quite a lot lighter. And I also noticed that there's a little bit more blue at the front of the beak there. So I'll put that in now. While I notice the thing, I might as well put it in case I forget later. You see how the lines have now blended in though? That's why it's okay to put these lines here. It's dark a bit on this side as well. That's it. going to use this dark with a little bit of extra to mix it up again. I'm also going to use it down for these spots on the neck. And I'll use it around the eye. And in here. And on this one I also want to use it for this dark area here. So it's moving around using the colour that you've already got on your brush on all of your little pictures at the same time. Will save you a whole load of time. That's it. And now I'm going to move across this one. Put it at the top here. Down the neck. So all those places that are being identified on this side, I'm also doing the same over here. You see what's happening now, that they're all kind of there building out. It's a very nice way to work. I have all of these little images all building out at the same time. Going back to this one, I want to put in some more on the beak. And this is a lot more on the reddish side. So I'm adding that. And then I'm going to use the water to pull it out. Blend it in here to this. I also want to add the top part, and this is where I'm going to need a little bit of white. Just to sort of give it a kind of chalky whiteness to the top of the beak. I mixed that with a bit of the Payne's grey, and that's given me this effect. I've just put it here, just wash some of that out because I didn't want to put it there. So. Now, a little bit more Payne's grey in here. Get a bit more contrast. That's it. Just sort of as I go along, looking at areas that still need a bit more darkening up. You've noticed that I'm leaving this bit here alone at the moment, and that's because I think I'll do that last to make sure that I'm never smudging it. So there's a lot of red in this leg, so using that umber colour. And some of that dark colour too, in the darkest parts. This bit under here is very dark. and also use it in the water too. Now it's time to start adding a few bits of yellow into this, I think. Particularly around the beak and the eye. I'm going to start with a very bright yellow, but the main colour that we're going to be focusing on is a yellow ochre, which is called tan in this set. I guess it's a little bit more sort of towards the orange side rather than a typical yellow ochre, but it does the same kind of effect that you would expect. So starting out with the brighter yellow. Now this can work very well if you mix it in again with these same colours. So if you mix it in with your Payne's grey and with your brown, it can really sort of help to so we've got the primary colours then. We've got a bluish tone, we've got a yellowish tone, and we've got a reddish tone. And that's sort of all you really need to be able to build out a picture. It's not about mixing all the colours that are present. It's about telling the eye where the main areas are of these primary colours. I've got the white and I'm just using it to blend a little bit these wet areas of colour together. And something happens when you do this that gives you a little bit like a rainbow effect. That's very beautiful. Now that the black has dried, it's okay to add that bright yellow to the eye. So just tone it down for a little bit of white. And can do it for the smaller one as well. For the smaller ones, all you really need is a sort of a hint of those yellows. And the same for this leg here. Can also find a bit of yellow in some of the other shading, and if you see any you can put that in. There's a tiny hint of it in this little ruff here, this little fringe under the chin, just at the top. It's probably the way the colour of the beak is just being reflected onto those white feathers, or by the white feathers. Now I'm just going to do the same idea, but I'm going to do it for this. So just completely avoiding where I've mapped out those feathers. And I'm putting the mixture of the two colours, the Payne's grey and the brown, in all of the gaps right now. So leave the areas marked out for the feathers alone, but go around them. Adding a little bit more blue just under here. And a bit more of the red at the very bottom. As soon as you start running out, add some more to the palette. And go again. I'm now adding darker areas around where there's shadows cast by the feathers. I noticed that at the very top of the back you get more of the reddy tones towards the bottom of the back and more of the bluey tones towards the top. And these colours they sort of gradually melt away into the white of the longer feathers. And then there's a very dark area underneath. So I've got all three. That's the brown, the blue and a spot of black mixed together again. Put under here. As soon as you start sort of adding like this contrast in, this really deep dark contrast, it really starts to work. It really starts to lift the rest of the picture. You can always wash it out a little bit if you don't want it as dark. That's what I'm doing under here. All of these longer feathers have just a little bit of dark underneath them. And that's the next challenge here. As There's not quite as many dark areas as you get up this side. Right, it's cleaning off my white. Sometimes make a bit of a mess. Just adding a few highlights. And I want to do this with paints here rather than my white highlighter pen, because the pens are going to be a bit too harsh. Okay. Now I'm almost done now. I just want to go back to my really detailed heron head and just see if there's anything else I can do to lift it some more. Let's go back with the dark, very dark colour. Chrome that eye. Back of the head, very dark. So it's about looking for the areas where you think that you've still not quite got the same level of light and shade as your reference picture. That's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to find the areas that are popping in my reference picture but are not popping in mine. And that's just experience. It just takes a while. You just got to compare the two. Sometimes what a friend of mine does very well is take the reference picture and use a filter on your phone to turn it to grayscale. So you're not getting distracted by the colours anymore. And then you can just see, are the lights and shades in your reference picture similar enough to the lights and shades in what you've painted? Gives you an opportunity to make changes if you need to. Now finally, just cycling through all of my reference pictures and just seeing if there's anything else that I've missed. It's often about making the darkest areas darker, usually at this stage. Because by now we've already identified all of the yellows, the reds and the blues. We've done that part. Just making sure that we've got a good balance between light and shade. I think I'm happy with this. The only bit I'm not happy with really is this bit at the bottom. I think I went in a bit much with the, I probably need a thinner brush or a finer point to get this right. I hope that you found that useful. That's several images of a heron across a 2-page spread in a journal, looking at differences between looking at the bird in more and less detail and how to approach that, and using a limited palette and just getting some of the areas of red, blue and yellow into the picture. As always, feedback is always appreciated, so if there's anything that you particularly enjoyed or you'd like me to do differently, I'm still learning how to do these real-time tutorials. It's very difficult when you're not really going to be cutting the video up. You've got to do your painting in real time, talk in real time. It's kind of more like streaming than it is like making a YouTube video. So any comments on that are welcome, and as always, thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next Paint Along tutorial.